For the next 5 minutes or so, we're going to spend some time practicing our mindfulness skills by observing our hand. Before we begin, just see if you can't notice what's going on in your mind right now. Maybe you're having thoughts about this exercise such as, this sounds really boring, this is going to be a waste of time, or this sounds really stupid. Whatever's happening in your mind, simply acknowledge it, allow it to be there, and if thoughts like that come up throughout this practice, again, just acknowledge them and bring yourself back to the instructions that are being given. To begin the exercise, just start by getting yourself into a comfortable position and just turn one of your hands palm upward. Hold it in a comfortable distance from your face and just see if you can't tap into a sense of curiosity. For the next few minutes, our aim is to observe this hand as if we're a curious scientist or a child who's never seen a hand before. We're going to begin by noticing the shape of your hand. Just mentally trace the outline of your hand, starting at the base of the thumb and tracing around all of the fingers. Notice the shapes of the space between the fingers. And notice where your hand tapers in at the wrist. And notice the colors of your hand. Notice that it's not just one color. There are different tones and shades. You might notice some dappled areas. And as you're paying attention to your hand, just see if you can't spread your hand, pushing your fingers back. Ever so slowly stretching your fingers out, pushing them as far back as they'll go. And just notice what happens to the color of your hand. Notice how your hand may blanch a little bit. And just slowly flex and contract your hand, noticing how the colors of your hand subtly change from one position to the next. And notice the lines in your palm. Just trace those lines with your eyes, noticing the shapes they make, where they come together. Noticing where they diverge or intersect. And pick one of those lines and just pay slightly closer attention to it. And see if you can't notice that this line is actually a number of smaller lines feeding into it and branching out of it. And now shift your attention to the fingertips. Notice the spiral patterns there. Notice how the pattern doesn't seem to stop at your fingertip, but actually spreads downwards into your finger. Trace the patterns from your fingertip all the way down and notice how they kind of get lost at the base of the finger as your finger transitions into the hand. And now ever so slowly, bring your little finger toward your thumb. As you do that, notice how your palm scrunches up. And then slowly release. And notice that the flesh resumes its normal contours. And now turn your hand to the side, almost in a karate chop position. And see if you can't notice the difference between the skin on the palm of your hand and the skin on the back of your hand. See if you can't notice on your index finger that there's almost a dividing line where the two types of skin meet each other. Using the pointer finger of your other hand, you might even run your finger along that ridge where the two types of skin meet. And see if you can't notice the texture between the skin on the back of your hand and the skin on the front of your hand. And now ever so slowly, turn your hand over, and we'll spend some time looking at the back of our hand. Notice the skin on the back of the hand. And notice any criticisms or judgments that your mind makes. Notice any scars or sunspots or blemishes. And notice the different colors in the skin. See if you can't notice where your skin passes over a vein. Noticing how the skin seems to scrunch up just slightly around the knuckles. And ever so slowly, curl your hand into a gentle fist and notice how the texture of your skin changes. Notice any comments your mind makes about that change. And focus in on your knuckles. And gently rotate your fist and notice the contours and valleys of your knuckles. And now tighten your fist and notice what happens to the knuckles, to their color and their prominence. And then ever so slowly open your hand up, straighten your fingers, and notice how your knuckles seem to disappear back into the hand. And now bring your attention to one of your fingernails and notice the texture of the nail. Notice the different shades of color. And notice where the nail disappears under the skin. And now ever so slowly, ever so gently, just wiggle your fingers up and down and notice the tendons moving under the skin. And now you can allow your hand to fall back into your lap or to a comfortable position. And just take a moment to reflect on that exercise. Take a moment to think about whether you noticed anything new about your hand that you hadn't noticed before. Ask yourself if you got hooked by any negative judgments about your hand, how your attitude towards your hand changed in any way. And maybe think back to some of the judgments that your mind had made about this exercise before it began, whether or not those judgments came true, and maybe reflect on how you can bring this type of mindful attention to other areas of your day as you move forward throughout your life.